Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me this evening for more Pest in Practice. And certainly we are kind of pushing forward towards the end of Season 2 for Pest in Practice. I'm really quite pleased with the progress we've been able to make and the support that you guys have given me. It's been a great season. I've enjoyed it a lot more than the first season, and I enjoyed that a lot. So it's been really great, and can't wait to kind of push further into the world of streaming and video tutorials and things like that. There's some exciting things in the pipeline I can't quite discuss at the moment, but I think you'll enjoy them in 2022. So this is the last stream of 2021, which is quite exciting. Certainly a crazy year, and so thank you all for all of the help and support along the way. Now, before we get into this, Owen has very kindly gone ahead and generated us some more unique tokens, some popes for today's stream. So if you have been collecting, if you've collected last week's, then I am just going to drop in the chat the link to go and grab this week's, so you can carry on your little collection of Pest in Practice popes. And thank you so much, Owen, again for putting in the effort and generating those for us, so that we all have something to take away from these streams. More than just knowledge and understanding of newsletter sites. So yeah, thank you very much, Aaron, for that. Okay, what has happened since last week? Well, I just spent a little bit of time today. I've not done tons. A little bit of time today cleaning things up a little bit. So you'll see, first of all, I've brought in latest posts on the homepage. And I'm using a bit of Tailwind CSS v3. You can kind of see how our cards here kind of snap into place. That's using Tailwind v3, which is really nice, very easy to integrate. And we have kind of the first 12 posts, I think, in latest posts there. So I just did that today. And the other thing is we put our footer in with our links. And we've also integrated Torchlight. So Torchlight is this amazing service that's developed by Aaron Francis and the team. And it's basically syntax highlighting for code blocks, which in a blog or a newsletter, a post, there will be plenty of code blocks. Like that's one of the main things on a programming blog, right? So if I go into our blog, and if we select a blog, I think actually it might have been a test blog. So let's go to news/wink. Yeah, here we go. And let's preview this post here. I created just a little example post with a PHP doc block, and you can see that Torchlight is basically handling all this syntax highlighting. So it's an amazing tool, really is. You hardly have to do any integration if you're using common marks for syntax highlighting. And there's also, if you're using Blade, there's a Laravel library you can install for Torchlight that will allow you to drop a Blade component in that does this for you as well. So yeah, if you've not seen Torchlight yet, go ahead, check it out. It really is amazing syntax highlighting. You don't have to worry about anything. You just write markdown in your posts. It takes care of everything else for you. So that went in today. However, even though we're kind of nearing the end content-wise, we haven't actually yet created the piece of functionality that will gather together all the latest posts from the last week, bundle them up into like an easy-to-read newsletter, and then send that newsletter off with Mail Coach. We did already integrate with Mail Coach. So if I go to news.pestphp.test and into Mail Coach itself, you can see we have Mail Coach set up. But we don't want to manually have to create these campaigns because it's going to be the same thing every week. And it just makes a lot more sense to automate grabbing the latest blog posts, checking that we actually have some latest blog posts for the week. And if we do, just sending them off in an automated campaign to anybody who's signed up to the newsletter using the form here on the homepage. So I want to take a look at that today. I also went and did a little bit of refactoring. I went and did a little bit of refactoring on how the blog works. So I want to just show you that for a moment. My second screen seems to have frozen again. So I'm just going to attempt to disconnect and reconnect that. Just give me a moment. See if we can't get this back up and running. Yeah, so I wanted to refactor how the blog works, and I went ahead and did that. So first things first, I've renamed it. If I go to my web.php file, I renamed it just to posts, right? And what I wanted is there will be blog posts on the blog, obviously. That's a given, right? We're going to have blog posts, but we might also have tutorials. We might have videos. We might have a menu item called Pest in Practice, and they will all share this exact same layout and page. It will just be the type of post that is loaded that will be different. So I wanted to have like a generic post controller, and then I wanted to have like aliases, in this case blog, for example, that only load, if I just show you in tags, that only load posts that have the blog tag. So I hope that makes some form of sense. And so how I chose to do this is I just went and did a tad of refactoring last week. And in Post Controller, you can see that I actually check the root. If there is a root, I'm going to actually load the tags in. I'm going to drop in extra tags. So what you can see is if I go to posts, we load in every post. And in here, I can say tags equals blog, for example. And that will load in all the posts that have the tag of blog. But if I go just to /blog, it's going to automatically do that for me. So it allows me to have these useful aliases that I can kind of make use of in my code, in my roots file, that will very easily allow me to get to various pieces of content and still use nice URLs, but not really have to do any extra work. So all of like the lazy loading of the posts and things like that is handled in a single location. But going forward, we can obviously expand this. Anyhow, that isn't the purpose of this evening's stream. So let's begin just thinking about how we might go about setting this up. I'm going to close this so I have a little bit of a clean slate to work with. And there's kind of two pieces to this, right? We need to build up a new newsletter, and then we need to send the newsletter. So 2 parts of the puzzle: build up the newsletter, send the newsletter. Let's create a test, and we can kind of just play around with maybe how this would look and feel. So I'll just close all of these down. So I've just got the test directory here, and it's going to be an action. Let's have actions, newsletters, and then let's have a PHP file for our test called create newsletter test. Okay, and what's this actually going to do? It is going to, let's just go with that. It creates a newsletter. So we're using MailCoach, which means if we take a look at the MailCoach documentation, the way you do it is you create a campaign, right? With a from, a subject, content, and to, which is the email list. So let's say expect campaign count to be 0. Okay, so there are no campaigns to start with, obviously. And then what we want to do is get this action. So we'll say action equals this app make. And hey, Francisco, good to have you with us. We're going to make our action here. And this would probably be like the default binding, possibly, in the container. But in all likelihood, I will have it swapped out for tests by default because I don't want to accidentally send a mailing list out to everybody when I'm running my application's test suite. So what we'll do instead is we will manually instantiate it in this instance. So let's have something called, have we done plural or singular in our actions so far? Yeah, we've done singular. So let's say create newsletter. Okay, and we'll say action handle. Okay, and once it's done, I'd expect this to have a count of 1, right? And the other thing I want to check here is it shouldn't do this. So it shouldn't go ahead and create a newsletter if there aren't posts from this last week. I hope that makes sense. Like, we don't want to create a newsletter and it basically say, oh, there's nothing new this week, because that's not a newsletter, is it? That's just a waste of people's time. So what to avoid that? So what we'll also say, because this is the happy path, is we'll create a bunch of posts. Let's do like 5 posts, for example, and we'll create 5 posts. And because of how I've set up the post factory, you'll actually see that publish date is now sub a day. In other words, automatically they've been published in the last week. Although saying that, what if this was sent on what if this test was run, say on a Monday? Then it wouldn't have happened within the last week. I guess the thing is, we could do it as relative date time, so we take the last 7 days, no matter what date the newsletter is sent out, or we could do it like Monday to Monday or Sunday to Sunday. We'll have to decide on the details a little closer to the time, but for now this is okay. So we'll do that, we'll handle, and then we'll expect the campaign count to be 1. So that's our very basic. Now when we run this, it's obviously going to fail. It's going to say create newsletter does not exist. So first things first, let's go create a backing contract for this. So new directory, newsletters, and then new class, creates newsletter. And this is obviously going to be an interface. And we're going to have a public function called handle. Okay, and I think possibly that's going to return a campaign. So we'll have that return a sparsy campaign. And then we need the actual implementation, which is going to go in actions, newsletters, and then a class which is create newsletter, or creates, create singular, and this implements creates newsletter. Okay, howdy Frake, thanks for the amazing service that is Mail Coach. So far so beautiful. So we'll add our handle method. It expects to return a campaign, and obviously this is dependency injected, which gives us some room to wiggle a little later on. Let's import our action and refresh this. So now it says the return value must be of type campaign, but in actual fact none were returned. So basically what it's saying is it didn't create a campaign. Let's actually go ahead and do a very dumb version of this. So I'm literally going to copy this code here and paste it in. Now I like to add a little query scope so I get syntax highlighting here, although actually that might not work, to be fair. That's interesting. Let's just have a look at how Sparsy's done this. What do we say? From this update. Okay. So actually, yeah, I think I'm going to go with the alternate, which is this here, just so we're not doing a large bunch of queries. Okay, so I'll drop these into a slightly nicer bit of syntax. And I'm not interested at the moment in tracking, so I'm going to get rid of that. We need to generate the HTML. For now, let's say something like div, hello world div, and my newsletter number 1 is okay. We obviously need a way to track how many newsletters have currently been sent and then be able to kind of increment if we want to use a number. In fairness, I might just say like Pest newsletter and leave it as a generic thing without numbering them. Although saying that, the subject may be unique in the table. I'm not quite sure yet. Now, one thing that we can do is in the constructor, because this is dependency injected, I can actually ask for an email list like this. And the reason is, for the Pest news site, we only have a single email list. That's the Pest newsletter. We're not going to be dealing with other email lists. So in my app service provider the other week, I actually already bound the email list to the first one that is called Pest Newsletter. So the idea is that you can just request an email list from the container at any point, and you will automatically receive the Pest Newsletter email list, which is really handy for things like this. You don't have to worry about doing that query over and over again. You can just grab the correct newsletter immediately. Get key. Okay, and we want to return this, right? So let's say return. And what's the problem here? Table mail coach has no content, no column named content. That's interesting. So what is that called? Mail coach campaigns. Mail coach. Create mail coach tables. Let's close that so we can see. Campaigns. From reply to subject. Status HTML. Structured HTML. Oh, is this because campaign is, I wonder if that's just maybe a slight error in the docs. What happens when we call the content function? Ensure updatable, update compact HTML. Oh no, because that would be HTML, right? Is there a cast? If you're in there, if you're around, Frey, and you have an answer to this, then please let me know. I don't know. That's a sendable. Let's go to a campaign. Take a quick look through. Sorry about this, guys. I'll figure this out in a moment. Because that is content, right? And then we pass HTML, and compact is just basically going to say HTML. Oh, sorry, that's my bad. Of course, it's HTML. That is correct. Sorry. So here we can just change this to HTML. And does it do anything else? Ensure updatable. No, it doesn't do anything else. So let's refresh. Yay, we now have that fixed. Awesome, yeah. So just a slight docs error there. That's good. We've helped Sparsy in return. Difficult job. Docs are always the hardest thing to keep up to date in my experience. I'm sure there's some better tooling that could exist around documentation. Maybe that's a project for the future. Anyway, so our test now passes. Technically, we've created a campaign. So here we go. We've had 5 posts. We create this campaign. It's dumb. It's not doing anything real. But for the purposes of our first test, it actually works nicely. Let's create our second test. So it will not create a newsletter if no content has been, or no posts have been published in the last week. So this is going to be weekly. And that's a good point. Yeah, by the time we've conversed here, Frank, I'm going to be ahead of you or behind you or one of the other. So I'll leave you on that one, and then if you haven't done it later, I'll go ahead and create a PR for the docs there. But anyhow, so I'm going to copy and paste this test so we have a starting point. And I'm now going to remove this because that's a little bit obvious at this point. And what we're going to say is let's create a post, just one. We don't need to do loads here. And I'm going to say that it's currently we've only got unpublished. I kind of want one that's published at, right? And then let's say now, and I tell you what, no, I don't know whether I'm overcomplicating things there. I prefer methods to having to manually insert things in the arrays here. Let's say publish date now, sub a week, sub a day. Okay, so it is published, but it was published over a week ago. And then we'll say, let's do another post with a publish date of now, add a day, right? So this post is too old. This post is for the future, let's say for the next newsletter. Okay, and we can say expect the count to be 0 because it shouldn't generate anything. And let's run that. Obviously, this is now going to fail. Nice, thanks, Frake. Super quick on that one. So the first thing we need to do is obviously perform some kind of logic. And let's say posts from last week. Or maybe let's just do this here and then we can extract it to its own method. So I want to say probably actually something like, let's request our private, which post action do we want? Maybe load publish posts. Yeah, so that'll do. Load publish posts. Load publish posts. Now, what does this receive? Because actually, in fairness, we might not be able to inject it, or rather, it might not make sense to inject it. The construct receives a null builder and will use load posts if it doesn't have a builder. So that actually would work quite nicely. So we can inject it, and we can say this, let's just call this posts query. So we'll say this post query, and I'm wondering whether we have another load posts action here, or whether we just handle it here. I'm wondering how many times we'll actually need the functionality of loading the post. For now, let's say where, oh look at this is brilliant, where the published at date, or rather the publish date, is greater than now sub a week. And I actually want count. So let's say, no, let's use get, because we probably want to pass it into this HTML at some point in the future. And we need a handle here. So we handle it, and then we request those posts where that's the case. And just for now, I'm going to launch the Ray tool. Yeah, it's quite handy having Frake in the stream, isn't it? We're going to launch the Ray tool, which is another tool from Sparsy, and we're going to say, just dump out the post from last week when I run this action. Okay, I can't remember actually whether I installed Ray here. So if we haven't installed Ray, let's go do that now. Launch the terminal, cd sites news.pest PHP, and then let's do composer require Sparsy Laravel Ray, and let's get this installed. Oh no, it's already there. That's interesting. Let's rerun it with dev. Let's have a look here. Okay. So we actually already have a problem. Call to undefined method, eloquent builder, published. So that's why it's never actually reaching the Ray call. Let's take a look at what the problem is here. Dump and die builder. Hold in. So I think what's actually happening is it's injecting a builder in. Yeah, look at that. That's interesting. So it's injecting a builder in for us, which we actually don't really necessarily want. Let's do builder dump and die to see if it's targeting a specific table. It's not. So because we're doing dependency injection, it's happening way too early, if that makes sense. Like it doesn't even know that it should be using a builder, or it doesn't even know which table it should be targeting is probably a better way to say that. So what we can do instead is we can pull this out of dependency injection. And if the need arises, we will add it as a parameter to the handle method. But for now, I'm just going to say something like new load publish posts and handle it that way. Okay, so now we have an error message that's perhaps more like what we'd expect. And let's clear this and just run the test again so we just have what we want. Okay, we have an empty collection, which is exactly what I would expect because there was nothing published in the last week in our test. So what we'll say is, let's do a nice early return. So if posts from last week is empty, then we just want to return, and this is going to have to change on the handle method here. We just want to return null because we don't need to create a campaign. And what we'll do here is obviously just update this to be a nullable campaign. Once we've done that, our test will once again pass, which is great. So now we've done a little bit of test-driven development here, and we've made sure, first of all, that we can create a newsletter. And if there are no posts to be published, it won't create a newsletter, which is great. Alrighty. What's the next thing we want to do? We need to actually give the newsletter a name that is perhaps a little more descriptive. First thing I want to do is just go to the mail coach tables, and I want to check the name here. Okay, so it doesn't have to be unique, which is good. So I think for now, we're just going to call this the Pest newsletter. And let's just go back into our test. And for the sake of clarity, I guess, we can say campaign equals action handle. And I'll say expect campaign name to be Pest newsletter. And let's run this. Failed saying that null is identical to Pest newsletter. So let's ray out the campaign and see what's happening there. So run that test again. Subject, sorry, my bad. Subject. Okay, run it again and we pass. Alrighty, so heading back to our create newsletter action, we have our email list, we're creating the campaign, it's called Pest newsletter. This probably needs to be updated to be our actual sender email that we have in our environment file. I don't know whether from email is optional, it could be, I'm not quite sure. But for now, let's say that we are interested in receiving it possibly here. So something like private string sender email from email. And we'll say this from email. Now when we run this, it's going to fail because now we cannot resolve the dependency. So we can actually go fix that in our app service provider. Let me check, have I got anything that's a little bit more, maybe our action service provider is a better place for this. So let's say public function register. So far we've got away with simple bindings, but at this point we have something that's a little bit more complicated. So we'll say this app bind, and we want to bind our implementation. So our create subscription, okay, the concrete implementation. And this is going to receive obviously a container. So container actually receives an application, but an application implements container. And I prefer not to use like the whole app, although actually saying that we need it, don't we? Illuminate, where are you? Application, Illuminate foundation, let's call it app. Okay, because we need it because we need the config to be able to grab the mail sender address. So what we're going to say is return new create subscription, and it requires our email list, and it also requires create subscription. Why have I put that? Sorry guys. Create campaign or create newsletter. My brain is not with it today, is it? Create newsletter, there we go. So it requires the email list, or we can do this, or we can do app make email list class, because that's just normal. We don't need to do anything special with that. But here we can say app make config, and then we can say get from the config mail dot, and let's just go to our mail config and look at from global from address. So from dot address. So mail dot from dot address. And now our test passes. So if you didn't know, in Laravel, if you need to make dependency injection do something a bit more complicated than just a simple binding from a interface to a concrete, you can actually use this syntax here, and it allows you to build things up in a more, I don't know, perhaps custom way would be a nice way of saying that. You can build it to the specification needed for that particular instance, but this will still be able to be bound to an interface, which is exactly what we'll want for our action a little bit later on. But yeah, if we go back to create newsletter, you can see now that we receive this from email, and we just post that in the campaign, which means we can change that at any time, but by default it will just fall back to whatever we've declared in our environment file. All right, so far so good. Let's think about this here. So this is interesting. We need a way to generate the automated HTML for our email. Now, I would actually like to do this, if possible, using Blade. I like Blade syntax. It will make it easier to loop over the posts, for example. And then ideally, what would actually happen is this would move into something a bit further down, or possibly not. Yeah, I think it needs to. So I think what there would be is like another action. Let's say like newsletter, or creates or generates newsletter content, right? So let's imagine that there's an action called that, and you handle that content, and once you've handled it, it's going to return to you the string. So this will be in charge of like rendering a Blade view, and it will render a Blade view. It will pass in the post from the last week, for example, and then it will just display that here. So it won't be the job of create newsletter to do that, but rather it'll be the job of another action. And by doing that, we can kind of split the two concepts apart. So the question is, does the handle method receive the parameters, a little bit like a view receives parameters? And I think the answer is yes, because there still has to be logic in here to do with this. I tell you what, for now, let's do it inline. And then what we can do is we can go backwards. We can backtrack on ourselves a little bit later on. So let's head down to resources and views. And let's create a new directory called newsletter. And in newsletter, let's create a new file called content.blade.php. Okay, and for now, I'm going to put a div in there, and I'm going to say hello world. Okay, so we'll go back, and we're going to say, and we might be able to literally just do this in line. We're going to say, give me a view. The view is going to be newsletter.content, and then render the view, and the render the view will create a string. Okay, so if we run the test again, it's going to pass, although I think that's actually the other test. Let's run the one that is actually going to generate a campaign. And what we'll do is let's dump and die, or even ray out the campaign just here, and come back. And yeah, we still have hello world, as you can see. But you'll see it's actually a little bit more in depth than that, because we are posting out this new line here. So it's gone one step further. But here's where things get really cool. So what we can do, in fact, let me keep that in there. And let's output HTML, get HTML. So let's ray out that. And I think we can actually say ray clear screen, and then send the campaign HTML, just so we don't have to keep clearing it manually. Okay, let's head back to here, and I want to actually pass some data into our view. And that data is going to be posts equals and posts from last week. Okay, head back to our content here, and I'm going to create an unordered list, and then I'm going to say at for each posts as post, and for each, and we'll have a list. I'm going to say post title. Okay, so simple as that. And then we'll head back to our test and let's run this again. Head to Ray. Look at this. This is really nice. So you don't have to use Blade just for your controllers. Blade is just an amazing templating engine. Blade is a really powerful HTML templating engine that you can use anywhere, and you just have to call the render method if you need to do create the HTML manually, which is exactly what we need to do here. So we still just build the view as normal, and then we call render on it. One thing I'm wondering is whether we call the view as a function here, or whether we inject the view in the constructor. I'm not quite sure yet. I think for now it's simple enough that it doesn't really matter. And we can always come back and change that as we go a little bit later on. So let's just create like a H1, and the H1 will say, hey there. And then we'll have like a P tag, and the P tag will say something like, here's what's new with Pest this week. And then we have an unordered list with a bunch of list items in it. And then we'll say, thanks for supporting Pest PHP. Keep testing. And then we'll have our sign off, which is something like span, regards, the Pest team. Okay, so very simple. This will change, probably have someone who's better at design come in and take a look at this, but for the purpose of the stream, this is great. We now want to test this. So I think because of how simple it is, I'm actually quite happy to leave it inside create newsletter. If it got more complex and we were passing in a lot more data, here's how you can clear array every time a test runs. The one line will even say, okay, I look forward to this. Just while I'm waiting for it to happen. If we were passing loads and loads of data in as our second argument here, I would probably move it out of this action, because at that point I think the action is doing too much. But yeah, for the purposes of this, it's not doing all that much work. It's nice and simple. We're doing a single database query. It's easy to understand what's taking place. So I'm pretty happy with kind of how this works. Okay, can we test the HTML? So here's a good question. Oh, we can do it with the expectation API. It's not quite as clean as, say, Laravel's API, but for the test response. But yeah, we can do it. Let me show you what I mean. So it will contain the titles of all posts published in the last week. And I guess we also want to make sure that it contains a link. So it will contain the titles and links to all posts published in the last week. Let's create some posts. So we'll say post. Let's create 5 posts. Okay. And we want to handle this action. So we'll do that here. And we'll say content equals handle and then get HTML. And we can say expect content to contain, and we kind of want to loop over each post, right? We want to loop over each post and check this. So let's say for each, and it would be nice to be able to do this with like the each expectation, but because we're handling it the other way around, we have a single string that we're expecting on. and we're doing something for each post that is outside of that expectation, we have to do it a little bit more manually. We could just say posts each, and let's say it's a wink post, clean up that code, and let's do it as a large function so we can separate things out a little bit. And oh, hey Ruslan. And let's do expect. I want to use that content. So expect content to contain post title. Let's run it, and it passes, which is great. We also want it to contain root posts.show post slug. And now we fail. And obviously we fail because in our content here, we've created this list, but we never actually wrap it in an anchor tag where we output the href. So let's do that now. So we'll say root post.show, and then we want the post slug. And we can close that one off. We can open one here. And let's drop these onto new lines, just so we can have nice visual separation. Run it again, and the tests all pass again. Let's run all 3 tests, make sure we've not broken anything in the process. Everything works. That's brilliant. Let's do that. Yeah, that's clean. Awesome. So we now have automatic HTML being generated. It's unstyled. It'll be ugly as anything, but it gets the idea out there. And then obviously it's just a matter of cleaning up that we have this newsletter that will be able to be sent out every week, and it will grab the post for that week. It will loop over them and say, look, here's a link to this post. Here's a link to that post. And so people can scroll through at the end of the week. They don't have to visit the website. They can go straight to the posts that they're interested in. Probably want the post excerpt in there too, but I'm not really worried about that just now, simply because I want it to go through the hands of someone who is better than me at design before I went about adding all those things. All right, so what else do we want to do? Well, we need to actually send these out, right? We need to actually send these out. One thing I want to do is I want an event to be fired whenever a new campaign is created. So it will fire an event whenever a campaign is created. And in fairness, you could probably listen for like the created event on the campaign itself. So you could listen for something like campaign created. That would work, but that would work no matter the campaign. I'm only interested in campaigns that have been automatically generated for the Pest newsletter. I don't want in the future there to be some random campaign that fires this event. So this is going to be event fake, and PHP Storm has given up automatically importing for me. So let's do that. So we'll clean that up. We're going to fake the event. I'm going to perform the action as usual. We need some posts. Okay, we need some posts if this is going to work. And then I want to say event assert dispatched, and we'll assert that it dispatched, and I'm going to call it newsletter created, because again, I want it to be distinct from the what am I trying to say here? Sorry guys, from a standard campaign being generated. So let's say campaign, because I'm going to check this in a moment. I want to say function, and this is a newsletter created event, and we will use the campaign. So you can pass this, let's actually use the right syntax here. You can pass this as a second parameter to assert dispatched, and it lets you basically return a truth statement to make sure it actually was dispatched, it's the right event. So we can say event or return event campaign is campaign. Okay. Now if we run this test, we can get rid of this, we never reference them. If we run this test, you'll see that it says, oh, this is interesting, not null constraint UUID. Email list seeder. Is that just a random failure? That's really interesting, isn't it? Email list, pest newsletter. Is this just... I wonder why that's only just started. I would kind of expect that to handle itself automatically, but maybe I'm wrong. Oh. I don't know there. Again, Frake, if you've got an answer here, buddy, that I would love that, but this is... Why is that only just started? What have we changed there that would cause that to take place? Let's take a look. I guess we faked events. Could it be that? We instead need to only fake the newsletter created event. And let's actually go ahead and create that. So make event newsletter created. And then we can obviously import that class. Yes, there we go. So it seems that there's another event being fired that's generating the UUIDs for the email list, which is good that we keep that in mind when we're faking these out. We need to fake the correct thing. Don't need the first parameter insert. Dispatch smart enough with the type hint in the callback. Oh, cool. I did not realize that, Ruslan. Thank you very much. So you're saying if we do this, we get the same thing. Awesome. That actually is, that'll save me a lot of keystrokes in the future. Hats off. Thank you very much. So we need to dispatch this event, right? Let's go to the create newsletter and we'll say campaign equals, and we can then say event dispatch new newsletter created, and we want to pass in the campaign, and then we can return the campaign. Okay, so if we run that, it's going to fail because it cannot grab the campaign property. We haven't added it yet. Let's say public campaign, and while we're here, let's clean up these comments. We don't need them, and we don't need this either because that's not what we're doing at the moment. We're not broadcasting or using WebSockets or anything like that. And now the test passes. Now, rather than using the event facade, I might want to pass this in as something along the lines of, trying to remember what it is it bus or dispatcher? Dispatcher events or event, and then we can say this event dispatch. Yeah, okay, cool. Now when we run that, it's going to fail because we need to actually update our action service provider to make it happy. So dispatcher class, and now that passes, and you can see that the event was indeed fired, which is brilliant. Now, one thing I also want to do is if the newsletter hasn't been created, no event should be fired, which is actually the case at the moment, but let's actually make sure that works as expected. So newsletter created class, and at the bottom here, we're going to say this assert not dispatched or assert sorry, my bad. Event assert not dispatched newsletter created. And when we run that, it passes because we've already integrated that functionality by how we coded it, but I just want an actual explicit check in there so that that doesn't fail in the future. So now basically we can guarantee that the next time we go ahead and create a newsletter using this action, it's going to dispatch this newsletter created event. Now the reason I want to dispatch that event is because Mailcoach has some pretty cool functionality, which is we can, where's it gone? Testing a campaign. we can send a test email. So what I want to do is hook into that event, and when it happens, I want to send a test email to the pest team. So before it's sent, way before it actually ever sends, we will receive a notification that it's going to be sent, and you'll be able to go check everything's okay, check the content's okay, check that nothing funny's going on, before it goes out to hundreds, potentially thousands of users, and they receive an email that they really don't want. You want to avoid that at all costs. So yes, that is what we're going to use this event here for. I think I'm just wondering whether we do that now, or whether we do kind of do the other thing for a moment. How much time do you reckon you would want between it being created and it being automatically sent out? That's a good question. Like, let's say I get an email that says, here's the content. How long do I want to give myself to check? Maybe 6 hours. And after 6 hours, it gets sent out. So that being the case, we kind of have this sort of tested and done, right? Let's come back to our action service provider. One thing I'm going to do is link this up. So I'll say create subscription class. Oh, sorry, I've done that again. Creates newsletter class goes to create newsletter class. So we'll bind those together. And I guess I could say that it's the default implementation, but we are going to actually update that. And we'll probably put it behind a manager, to be fair. Probably put it behind a manager so that the tests can, the PHP unit.xml. Let's do that now. Sorry, I'm jumping back and forward today because we're in new territory here. Like I'm kind of discovering as we go. But yeah, rather than do this basic implementation, I'm actually going to do something a little more in depth. And you'll see why in a moment. So let's create a new class or a new directory called managers. And let's create a new class, and this is going to be create newsletter manager. And this extends Illuminate support manager. So this is a class. This is like a class and a feature that isn't talked about that often, but it's really pretty cool. And you should definitely understand how they work and why you'd want to use them. So what we're going to do here is return this config get, and let's create a new config file called actions.create. Did you call it? Yeah, creates newsletter.driver, right? So, and then we can give it a default of null. And you want to be passing a string of null rather than just null. So we need to create that, obviously. So let's go to our config. And in here, we'll create a new PHP file called actions. And we want to return an array. And then we have creates newsletter. And in here, we're going to have our driver. And that's going to be equal to an environment variable, which will be create newsletter action driver. And the default is going to be this one here, which is like, let's call that Sparsy, right? Or mail coach. So that's set up for us. Now we called it mail coach. So what we do is public function create mail coach driver. And this is going to return our create newsletter. Okay, so return new create newsletter. And what we can actually do is we can go back to our action service provider and we can grab this code here and drop this in here. So instead of saying app make, we can say this container make. And this one here can become this config. Okay, so we are returning a new create newsletter. Let's get this working first, and then we can come back a little bit later on once it is kind of ready. So we'll go back to our action service provider, and I now need to register our interface, our contract. So this app, let's bind the create newsletter to a function, and we're going to return a new create newsletter manager. Okay, and you have to pass in the application, I think. So that'll be application, pass that in there, and we want to return the driver. Okay, so that's all we need to do there. And so what's actually going to happen is it's going to hit this, it's going to say, right, what's the default driver? It will look in the config, it will grab the correct value, it will fall back to null, which we'll implement in just a moment. And then it's going to hit this and return this create newsletter. So in our test now, I'm going to say before each, and we're going to say config set actions creates newsletter driver to mail coach, because that's not going to be the default for our tests. Okay, and now I can say action equals this app make creates newsletter, which is instead referencing the implementation rather than, the contract rather than the implementation. So we'll just go through, and I want to basically replace all of these instances of create newsletter with creates newsletter. So run these, the test is still passing, which is great. That's wonderful news. Awesome. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that. And now what we want to do is we want to create the test version of this, or the null driver. So what I'm going to do is in my test directory, I'm going to create a new directory called doubles. And in here, I'll create a class called fake create or create newsletter. And it's going to implement our create newsletter contract with handle there. And GitHub Copilot there being a bit of a nightmare. And in here, we need a campaign, right? We want to create either a campaign or return null. So what I'm going to do instead for now is I'm just always going to return null. There will never be a campaign because it's fake. However, we could do a quick test assertion in here. So we can say public int times called 0. And we can say here, this times called plus plus, right? And we can have a public function called assert called, and you can pass int times. It's void, and it's just going to say assert from PHP, assert count times this times called. Expected count, other way around, my bad. And it's not assert count, it's assert equals times called times like that. Okay, so now we have like a useful test version that we can use in tests. However, we need to implement it in our manager. So we're going to say public function create null driver, and this is going to return a fake create newsletter. So return new fake create newsletter. Awesome. So now, which is what we're going to do, if we implement or alter the value of our create newsletter action driver, which we'll just do here, then basically it will use our fake driver. So in our tests, everywhere apart from, say, here, we'll use that fake driver, which will mean that there is no way that we can accidentally send a campaign, which would be absolutely terrible. We definitely don't want to send any campaign when we're not sure we actually want to. Just give me 1 second. My screen's frozen again. I'm going to have to find a better way of having a second screen than casting to my iPad, because it seems to fail hard on me way too often to actually be useful. Let me have a look. Hello, please. I want to start writing tests in Laravel apps. No, my answer to you would be do whatever suits your style the most. So although Laravel comes out of the box with Pest, with PHP unit, it's easy to get Pest installed. And if you follow the instructions on Pest documentation for installation, it will actually just get you up and running straight away. So as long as you're not already written a bunch of PHP unit tests and you're in a fresh Laravel project, it's super easy. Yeah, it's not even it's barely an inconvenience, I guess, would be what I would say. So just go for that. It'd just be simpler. Just go for that. But yeah, don't get hung up. It's testing, isn't it? Whatever you prefer to use to write your tests, that's what's important. Okay, so I feel like we've gone around the houses a little bit here, but the result is that we now have a safe and secure way of running our tests without fear that there will ever be a situation where we send out newsletters to random people, and also where we don't have to necessarily actually create a campaign to test that it used the action that the newsletter campaign was created. So I'm going to have a play with that in the next week and kind of see how I like that, and kind of see if that's maybe a bit overboard. But I wanted to kind of show you the manager paradigm. I never see this referenced anywhere, but it's such a powerful little thing. And I used to, when I had things like drivers, I used to reference them kind of directly in here. So I would have like driver like this, which is quite common. And then inside each driver, I would have like services. And then in each service, I would have, say, like mail coach. And then the mail coach class, like that. And like it was so horrible. And I knew Laravel didn't do it that way. So I was so glad when I kind of found out about the manager a little while back. And this is just a much nicer way to create these fake implementations that go alongside your real implementations when you need that level of power. So yeah, that's kind of a good point to stop. I think we've hit over an hour. My second screen is completely frozen up. I'm hoping I can actually end this stream. Yeah, while I try to do that, let me just kind of sum up and finish off. So first of all, thank you again for coming along. I just want to say, make sure that you go and grab your POAP. So proof of attendance protocol. Make sure you go get that. You all deserve to have one. And I just want to say, as always, thanks for joining the stream. I really, really do appreciate that. And like the continued support is really good. I've had an amazing 2021. I'm definitely looking forward to 2022. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Speaking at Laracon Online 2022. So I kind of got that information just the other day, and I'm super stoked for Laracon Online 2022. I've got an interesting talk actually all about actions. So we've been using actions heavily in the Pest PHP newsletter site. I'm going to give a talk all about them, why you'd want to use them, how you can get the most out of them. It's more or less going to be like a summary of the Pest in Practice second series, really, with all of that content kind of condensed into a 40-minute talk. So looking forward to that. I hope you can be there to join me and enjoy it. And I just want to say again, thank you so much. I'll see you all next year. Have a great evening and rest of the week. Take care, guys.